When we hear about wars on the news, the stories are often filled with sadness and destruction. But even in the middle of a conflict, there are rules that every country and every soldier is supposed to follow. These rules are designed to protect people who are not fighting, like ordinary men, women, and children. They also protect places that are essential for life, such as hospitals, schools, and homes. When someone breaks these very important rules on purpose, it is called a war crime. These are not just sad events that happen during a war. They are serious crimes under international law, and the world has agreed that they are unacceptable. The conflict in Ukraine has brought this issue to the forefront, showing us why these rules are so vital. Understanding war crimes is important for all of us, not just for lawyers or politicians. It helps us see the difference between the legal acts of war and illegal acts of cruelty. The rules of war, often called international humanitarian law, were created over many years. Countries came together after seeing the terrible suffering in past conflicts and decided that humanity needed a line that could not be crossed, even by armies. This means a soldier cannot simply do whatever they want. They have a duty to avoid harming civilians and to treat captured enemies with dignity. This essay will explain what these rules are and how they apply to the events we have seen in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. We will look at real examples from the war in Ukraine, where many people believe serious war crimes have happened. Reports from organizations like the United Nations have described media group, United Nations investigators at bomb site, UN press conference, journalists holding official war crime report or stock distribute equally, attacks on apartment buildings where families were sleeping, missile strikes on crowded train stations, and the bombing of theaters where people were hiding. By examining these events, we can better understand what makes an action a war crime. It is about intention. It is about whether an attack was aimed at a military target or if it was deliberately or carelessly aimed at civilians. These distinctions are at the heart of international law and are what investigators look for when they gather evidence. The goal of this essay is to make these complex ideas clear and simple. We will explore what the laws say, who is protected by them, and what happens when they are broken. We will also talk about the international courts and organizations that work to bring justice to the victims of these terrible acts. Holding people accountable for war crimes is not just about punishing the guilty. It is about sending a message that the world is watching. It is about honoring the victims and trying to prevent such atrocities from happening again in the future. The quest for justice is long and difficult, but it is a fundamental part of our shared commitment to human dignity, even in the darkest of times. At the heart of international law during a conflict are three simple but powerful principles. These rules are designed to protect human life and limit the brutality of war. The first and most important rule is the principle of distinction. This means that those fighting in a war must always distinguish between combatants and civilians. Soldiers and military sites are considered legitimate targets, but ordinary people like farmers, doctors, shopkeepers, and their homes are not. An army cannot just fire weapons into a city without a specific military goal. They must aim only at military objectives. This rule is the foundation of protecting non-combatants, ensuring that people who are not part of the fight are kept out of it as much as possible. The second key rule is the principle of proportionality. This idea is a bit more complex, but it is just as crucial. It says that even when an army is attacking a valid military target, the harm caused to civilians or civilian property must not be excessive in relation to the expected military advantage. For example, if there is one enemy soldier hiding in a large hospital full of patients, blowing up the entire hospital would be a disproportionate attack. The small military gain of defeating one soldier does not justify the immense loss of civilian life. This rule forces military commanders to think carefully about the consequences of their actions and to weigh the military benefit against the potential cost to innocent people. The third principle is precaution. This rule requires armies to take all possible steps to avoid or at least minimize harm to civilians. This includes doing everything they can to verify that a target is truly military and not civilian. It also means choosing weapons and methods of attack that are less likely to cause accidental harm to the surrounding area. For example, if a military target is located in a crowded neighborhood, an army should use precise weapons instead of large, unguided bombs. They should also give effective advance warnings of an attack whenever possible to allow civilians time to escape to safety. Precaution is about being careful and responsible even while engaged in combat. These three rules, distinction, proportionality, and precaution, form the core of the Geneva Conventions and other international treaties that govern warfare. They are not suggestions, they are legal obligations. Every soldier, from the lowest-ranking private to the highest general, is required to know and follow them. When these rules are ignored, whether deliberately or through severe negligence, the actions can be investigated as war crimes. They exist to preserve a small piece of our humanity in the midst of conflict and to remind everyone that even in war, there are limits. The events in Ukraine have repeatedly tested these principles as the world watches and documents the consequences. One of the most visible and heartbreaking types of war crimes we have seen in Ukraine involves direct attacks on civilians. According to the rule of distinction, people who are not fighting are protected. Yet, countless reports from journalists and human rights groups have documented missile strikes, drone attacks, and shelling that have hit places with no clear military purpose. For example, there have been numerous attacks on residential apartment buildings in cities across Ukraine, often happening at night when people are asleep in their beds. When a missile destroys a block of flats far from any military base or factory, it raises serious questions about whether civilians were the intended target, which would be a grave breach of international law. The use of certain weapons in populated areas also points to potential war crimes. Investigators have noted that Russian forces have sometimes used indiscriminate weapons, meaning weapons that cannot be aimed precisely. These include media group, cluster munition damage in Ukrainian town, bomb blitz scattered in civilian areas, stock, distribute, and equally, cluster munitions which release many small bombs over a wide area, or unguided missiles fired into urban centers. When such weapons are used in a city, it is almost impossible to distinguish between military targets and civilians. The result is often a large number of civilian casualties. For example, a missile strike on a train station in Kramatorsk, which was crowded with families trying to evacuate, killed dozens of people. Attacks like these are considered war crimes because they fail the basic test of distinction. Another pattern documented by United Nations investigators involves drone attacks that seem to hunt down civilians. In regions like Kherson and Mykolaiv, reports have described drones targeting individual people walking down the street or even emergency responders rushing to help others. These attacks are particularly chilling because they suggest a deliberate choice to kill non-combatants. There is no military advantage to be gained from killing a person riding a bicycle or a paramedic trying to save a life. Such acts appear to be purely intended to spread terror among the civilian population, which is strictly forbidden under international law and can be prosecuted as both a war crime and a crime against humanity. These examples from Ukraine show a clear and disturbing pattern of disregard for the most fundamental rule of war, the protection of civilians. Each attack on a home, a market, or a public square where ordinary people gather is not just a tragedy, but a potential crime. Investigators from Ukraine and international bodies are carefully collecting evidence for each of these incidents. They analyze satellite images, witness testimony, and weapon fragments to determine what was hit and what was used. The goal is to build a case that can prove these were not accidents but deliberate or reckless acts that violate the laws of war, so that those who gave the orders can one day be held accountable. Beyond direct attacks on civilians, another major category of war crimes involves the destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure. These are the things people need to survive and live their lives, such as homes, schools, hospitals, and sources of power and water. International law specifically protects these places unless they are being used for a direct military purpose. In Ukraine, we have seen widespread and systematic destruction of this essential infrastructure. For months, especially during the cold winter, Russian forces launched waves of missiles and drones against Ukraine's energy grid. This left millions of people without electricity, heat, and running water for long periods. These attacks on power stations and utility networks are often considered war crimes because their primary goal seems to be to make life unbearable for the civilian population. While an energy plant could sometimes be a legitimate military target, if it is directly powering a military base, a widespread campaign to shut down power for the entire country is different. The main effect is to cause suffering among ordinary people, not to achieve a direct military victory on the battlefield. Human rights organizations have classified these attacks as illegal because the harm they cause to civilians is massive and disproportionate to any potential military benefit. It is a strategy that targets the variability of a society to function. Hospitals and schools are given special protection under the laws of war. They are supposed to be safe havens, marked clearly, so that they can be avoided by fighting forces. Yet hundreds of medical facilities and schools across Ukraine have been damaged or destroyed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. There have been reports of maternity wards being hit by bombs and clinics being shelled while doctors were treating patients. Unless a hospital is being used by the enemy to launch attacks, it is absolutely illegal to target it. Each attack on a medical center not only kills and injures patients and staff, but also cripples the healthcare system, making it harder for everyone else to get medical care. The same protection applies to schools, cultural sites, and places of worship. Destroying these places is not only a war crime, but also an attack on the identity and future of a nation. The evidence of this destruction is overwhelming. Satellite images show entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, and international observers have documented each damaged school and hospital. Ukrainian prosecutors, along with international teams, are building legal cases based on this evidence. They aim to prove that this destruction was not just collateral damage, but part of a deliberate strategy to terrorize and demoralize the Ukrainian people by taking away everything they need to live a normal life. While bombing and shelling are the most visible war crimes, international law also forbids many other terrible acts that can happen during a conflict. These crimes focus on protecting the dignity and safety of individuals, both civilians and captured soldiers. One of the most serious of these is the willful killing or execution of people who are not fighting. This includes civilians in occupied territories or soldiers who have surrendered or are injured and can no longer fight. In towns that were occupied by Russian forces, such as Bucha, investigators found evidence of civilians having been shot and left on the streets, some with their hands tied behind their backs. These acts are murders and are considered grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. Another category of war crimes involves the mistreatment of people. This includes torture, inhuman treatment, and causing great suffering or serious injury. There have been numerous accounts from released prisoners of war and civilians who were held in detention by occupying forces. They have described being beaten, electrocuted, and subjected to mock executions. The law is very clear. All people in custody, whether they're soldiers or civilians, must be treated humanely. Taking degrading photos or videos of prisoners or dead bodies and sharing them is also a war crime, known as an outrage upon personal dignity. It is meant to humiliate the victim and their family and is strictly prohibited. The forced deportation or transfer of civilians is another serious war crime. An occupying power is not allowed to move people out of their own country against their will. One of the most prominent allegations against Russia is the forced transfer of thousands of Ukrainian children. These children were taken from occupied territories and brought to Russia, where many were placed with Russian families and given Russian citizenship. This is seen as an attempt to erase their Ukrainian identity. The International Criminal Court has taken this so seriously that it has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and another official, specifically for their alleged involvement in this illegal deportation of children. Finally, there are other specific actions forbidden in combat. For example, it is a war crime to declare that no prisoners will be taken, a practice known as denying quarter. This is in order to kill every enemy soldier rather than allowing them to surrender. Another illegal act is perfidy, which is faking a protected status to trick an enemy. For instance, it would be a war crime to use an ambulance marked with a red cross to transport soldiers and launch an attack. All of these rules exist to ensure that even in war, there are lines that cannot be crossed, protecting the fundamental rights and dignity of every human being. Beyond individual war crimes, international law defines two other major categories of crimes that are considered exceptionally serious: crimes against humanity and the crime of aggression. While they are related to war crimes, they're actually distinct. Crimes against humanity do not have to happen during a war, but they often do. The key feature is that they are not random acts of violence. Instead, they are part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population. This means the acts are part of a larger plan or policy, which could be official or unofficial. The goal is often to terrorize, remove, or destroy a group of people. In the context of Ukraine, many of the alleged war crimes could also be classified as crimes against humanity. For example, the repeated large-scale missile strikes on civilian buildings and energy infrastructure across the country fit the description of a widespread attack. The systematic torture and abuse of civilians in occupied areas, or the organized deportation of children, could be seen as part of a systematic policy. The list of acts that can be crimes against humanity includes murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, imprisonment, torture, and persecution against any identifiable group. Proving this charge requires showing a broader pattern of behavior that goes beyond isolated incidents on the battlefield. The other major international crime is the crime of aggression. This is sometimes called the mother of all crimes because it is the crime that makes all the other violence of war possible. The crime of aggression is the act of planning, preparing, initiating, or executing an illegal war. It focuses on the decision-making of the highest political and military leaders who chose to launch an invasion that violates the United Nations Charter, which prohibits one state from attacking another. Many legal experts and governments around the world believe that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is a clear case of the crime of aggression. Prosecuting the crime of aggression is very complex. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, currently does not have jurisdiction to prosecute this specific crime in the case of Ukraine. Because of this legal gap, Ukraine and its international partners have been working to create a special tribunal specifically for the crime of aggression. This proposed court would focus only on holding the top Russian leaders who orchestrated the invasion accountable. This is different from the ICC's work, which focuses on war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by individuals on the ground or by their commanders. The push for this special tribunal shows a global commitment to not only punish atrocities within the war, but also to condemn the act of starting the war itself. When a war crime is committed, the question of who is to blame is not always simple. Responsibility can extend from the soldier who pulls the trigger all the way up to the political leader who gives the orders. Under international law, anyone who commits, orders, or assists in a war crime can be held criminally responsible. This means that a low-ranking soldier who shoots an unarmed civilian can be prosecuted. It is not an excuse to say, I was just following orders, if the order was clearly illegal, such as an order to kill prisoners or torture a detainee. Every member of an armed force has a personal duty to refuse to carry out such unlawful commands. Responsibility also extends upwards through the chain of command. This is known as command responsibility. A military commander, an officer, or a general can be held responsible for war crimes committed by the troops under their control, even if they did not personally order the crimes. This can happen in two ways. First, if a commander knew that their subordinates were about to commit a crime and did nothing to stop them, they are culpable. Second, if they should have known about the crimes. For example, if there were widespread reports of abuse, and they failed to take reasonable measures to prevent them or to punish those responsible, they can also be prosecuted for their negligence. This principle of command responsibility reaches the very top of a country's leadership. Political leaders, such as a president or a prime minister, can also be held accountable. If they, as the ultimate commanders-in-chief, either ordered illegal actions or created policies that led to war crimes, they are not immune from prosecution. The idea that no one is above the law, not even a head of state, is a cornerstone of modern international justice. This is why the International Criminal Court was able to issue an arrest warrant for Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, for his alleged role in the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. It demonstrates that the highest levels of power can be targeted for accountability. Therefore, the net of responsibility is cast very wide. It includes the individuals who directly carry out the atrocities, their immediate superiors, who fail to stop them, and the senior military and political leaders who orchestrate the campaigns that make these crimes possible. Identifying who is responsible at each level is a massive undertaking for investigators. They must gather evidence that links a specific crime to a specific person or shows that a commander had effective control over the troops responsible. This difficult but essential work is the foundation for any future trials, ensuring that justice is not limited to the foot soldiers but reaches all who share in the guilt for these terrible acts. When war crimes are alleged to have happened, bringing those responsible to justice is a long and complicated process that involves many different organizations. The first line of defense is a country's own legal system. Ukraine's domestic courts have been working tirelessly to prosecute war crimes. Since 2022, Ukrainian prosecutors have opened over 150,000 criminal investigations into alleged atrocities. They have already held some trials and secured convictions, although many of these have been in absentia, meaning the accused person was not present. However, the sheer number of crimes is overwhelming for any single country's justice system, which is why international help is so important. This is where the International Criminal Court, or ICC, located in The Hague, Netherlands, plays a crucial role. The ICC is the world's only permanent international court set up to prosecute individuals for genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. The ICC's prosecutor has opened a full investigation into the situation in Ukraine and has already issued arrest warrants for high-level Russian officials. However, the ICC has its limits. It can only handle a small number of cases, so it focuses on those who are most responsible, such as senior political and military leaders. The court also relies on countries to arrest and hand over suspects, which can be very difficult, especially when the suspects are from a powerful nation. In addition to the ICC, other legal pathways are being used to achieve justice for Ukraine. One important tool is universal jurisdiction. This is a legal principle that allows a country to prosecute certain very serious crimes, like war crimes, in its own national courts, no matter where the crime was committed or what the nationality of the accused or victim is. For example, in March 2025, a court in Finland used this principle to convict a Russian mercenary commander for war crimes he committed in Ukraine back in 2014. This case was a landmark victory, showing that even if justice is hard to achieve in Ukraine or at the ICC, other countries can step in to help close the accountability gap. Finally, the international community is creating new tools to address the immense damage caused by the war. In December 2025, an International Claims Commission for Ukraine was launched in The Hague. This body will not prosecute criminals, but it will create an official record of all the damage and losses suffered by Ukrainian individuals, businesses, and the state. It will review millions of claims for everything from destroyed homes to loss of life. The goal is to establish a legal basis for Russia to pay reparations for the destruction it has caused, potentially using frozen Russian assets held in other countries. Together, these different efforts, domestic trials, the ICC, universal jurisdiction and claims commissions, form a multi-layered approach to seeking justice and accountability. The laws of war were created from the painful lessons of history. They were born from the recognition that without rules, conflict descends into limitless brutality and humanity loses its way. The terrible events in Ukraine, the bombing of cities, the targeting of civilians, and the destruction of hospitals and homes are a stark reminder of why these rules are not just abstract legal ideas but a vital shield for ordinary people caught in the crossfire. They represent a global promise that every human life has value and that even in times of war, a person's dignity should be protected. Upholding these laws is a responsibility that belongs to the entire world because they protect our shared humanity. The quest for justice for the war crimes committed in Ukraine is a monumental task. It is slow, difficult, and often frustrating. Courts, like the ICC, can only prosecute a few of the most high-profile cases, and bringing powerful leaders to trial is a huge political and practical challenge. Yet, every effort matters. Every piece of evidence collected, every witness testimony recorded, and every court case filed, whether in Ukraine or in a country practicing universal jurisdiction, is a step toward accountability. These actions send a clear message to perpetrators that their crimes are being documented and that they may one day face a courtroom. It tells victims that they have not been forgotten. Holding individuals accountable for war crimes does more than just punish the guilty. It helps to re-establish the rule of law and reinforces the idea that no one is above it. Justice can help communities heal by providing a formal acknowledgement of their suffering and a sense of closure. It also serves as a powerful deterrent, warning future leaders and soldiers that if they commit such atrocities, the world will work to bring them to justice. By pursuing accountability, we strengthen the international legal order that was built to prevent such horrors from happening again. It is a fight for a future where conflicts are resolved with less cruelty and more respect for human life. Ultimately, the laws of war are a reflection of our most basic values. They remind us that even when nations are in conflict, we are all part of a single human family. The protection of civilians is not a choice. It's a fundamental duty. When we insist on accountability for war crimes in Ukraine, we are not just standing with the Ukrainian people. We are standing up for the principles that protect all of us, everywhere. We are defending the idea that there is a right and a wrong, even in the chaos of war, and that the fight for justice, no matter how long it takes, is a cause worth fighting for.